President Trump gets to work on day 3. I'm Elaine Quijano, and this is Red and Blue. Ahead on the program, tensions grow between the White House and the intelligence community, and more than 1 million protesters march around the world. But first, President Trump gets to work. It was a busy day in Washington on Monday, beginning with a meeting between President Trump and business leaders at the White House. The president reiterated several campaign promises, including cutting regulation, reducing taxes for companies and the middle class, and implementing a border tax on goods made abroad. The president also got started changing law. He signed 3 presidential memoranda, most notably withdrawing the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. And there was progress on a pair of cabinet picks as well. Kansas Congressman Mike Pompeo was confirmed by the Senate to be the next CIA director. And Rex Tillerson has moved on to the next stage in the process of becoming Secretary of State. He was approved by a Senate subcommittee earlier today. And after slamming the media for its coverage of the inaugural crowds over the weekend, Press Secretary Sean Spicer took questions at his first formal press briefing.
I was going to start with a little recap of the inauguration, but I think we've covered that pretty well. By the way, just as I get started, I know that Josh Earnest was voted the most popular press secretary by the press corps. So after checking my Twitter feed, I shot Josh an email last night letting him know that he can rest easy, that his title is secure for at least the next few days.
Our Margaret Brennan is at the White House. So, Margaret, after Sean Spicer's appearance Saturday, there were a lot of questions about how the Trump administration would deal with the media. You were in the briefing room earlier. What stood out to you about Sean Spicer's first briefing as White House press secretary?
I think he really tried to hit the reset button, walk back some of those comments that really had a harsh hearing to them for many people. They walked away thinking that on Saturday that Sean Spicer had blasted all of the press. Today, he reverted to what seemed to be more of a standard White House briefing, taking questions. He did change a few things. He didn't start off with the wires, with AP and Reuters. Instead, the New York Post got the first question. And he moved at a very rapid pace, not allowing reporters, or at least not allowing all reporters, to really engage in any kind of back and forth. It was sort of one question and you're done. A few reporters did get to have a bit of a back and forth, but it was a changed briefing, but it was less combative than I think many expected, given Sean Spicer calling all of the journalists in the room dishonest on Saturday.
Well, and Margaret, President Trump signed 3 presidential memoranda Monday on policies ranging from trade to abortion. What does it tell us that he took such action on his first full business day in office?
Well, I think the more notable one is the TPP, that free trade deal with 11 Asian Pacific countries. Donald Trump, who is a businessman and said he wants to negotiate business deals to push back against China, withdrew from the deal that the Obama administration crafted. They said to do just that. So it was a symbolic move because Congress was unlikely to approve it. But what Trump did today was say, I don't believe any longer in multilateral trade deals. Instead, we're going to do this one-on-one with individual countries.
Margaret Brennan at the White House for us. Margaret, thank you so much. On Monday evening, President Trump hosted congressional leaders from both parties for a reception at the White House. Democratic leaders have been critical of the president's agenda, but lawmakers described the reception as friendly. The president also huddled with Republican leadership later in the evening to discuss plans to repeal the Affordable Care Act. For more on Mr. Trump's first days in office, let's bring in Lanhee Chen in our Washington bureau. He was policy director for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign, and he's a fellow at the Hoover Institution. Lanhee, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Elaine.
So let me start by asking you on what he billed as his first full day of work. Mr. Trump met with business leaders and then with union leaders, but he also signed a federal workforce hiring freeze, angering many union chiefs. What should we take away from his first full day?
I think there's a couple of things we can take away. The first is that he's really trying to build a new kind of political coalition. His very first major policy act was really to go after the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a major salvo in free trade, really by going against that, trying to curry favor with those who might be union members. And then on the other hand, he's trying to create this division perhaps between public sector unions and private sector unions, obviously trying to get on the good side of private sector unions while eschewing public sector unions. And this is all part of building, as I said, a new political coalition. We'll see if it works, but so far at least the politics are quite intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me ask you, on executive action, Republicans blasted President Obama for his use of executive action. Mr. Trump's party is both houses of Congress. So what does it tell you that he's using this executive authority?
A lot of irony here, actually, Elaine, because what President Trump is trying to do, particularly on the Affordable Care Act, is to use executive action to tear down the law in the same way that President Obama, former President Obama, used executive action to implement the law. And for Republicans, traditionally, the use of broad executive authority in this way really has been anathema to conservative values. So we'll have to see if President Trump actually moves forward with what was potentially a very sweeping executive action on the Affordable Care Act.
So, Lanhi, you just mentioned conservative values. Let's put up the New York Times headline from the weekend, quote, "Inaugural speech dims GOP hopes for a more conservative Trump agenda," end quote. Now, given the speech and his first actions in the White House, what do you think regarding conservatives here? Should they be concerned?
I think it's a little bit of a mixed picture. On the one hand, I think conservatives are pleased by the aggressive action on Obamacare. They're pleased by the federal workforce freeze he signed today. They're pleased by the freeze on additional regulation, and they're probably pleased by the extension of the Mexico City policy banning the use of U.S. funds to organizations that would use abortion or use abortion as a technique for family planning abroad. However, you've also got infrastructure, you've got an anti-free trade posture, you've got an American foreign policy that seems to be more inward-looking. These are things that might trouble Republicans. But again, Donald Trump is not your conventional Republican, so I don't think he minds a little bit of ambiguity.
All right. Well, lay out the fault lines, if you could, for us, Lanhi, that we could see between Republican majority in Congress and President Trump.
The first major battle is really going to be over free trade. And here you saw President Trump move aggressively to pull out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He was rebuked in some ways by Senator John McCain. John Cornyn of Texas also expressed some concern about a position that's more anti-free trade. So I would certainly expect to see some fault lines developing there. And then the next question is going to be on issues of fiscal conservatism. If Trump is going to push a larger infrastructure package that is not fully funded, I think some Republicans are going to say we can't get on board with that because it goes against our fiscal conservative beliefs and fiscally conservative values. So those are two areas where I would look right away for potential conflict between congressional Republicans and the new president.
Yeah, spending is always an issue for some. All right, well, we've learned, Lanhi, that Mr. Trump told congressional leaders Monday that illegal ballots cost him the popular vote. What do you make of Mr. Trump's relitigating those numbers?
I think part of this is just him trying to reinforce the thematic that it's him against the world. I think that there's some advantage that he sees and that his administration sees to continuing that dialogue. I'm not sure in the long run that's a winning strategy, but for now at least it appears as though they believe they can get mileage out of the conflict between the establishment and the outsider, and also between those who would try to wrong him and potentially try to disrupt his presidency as it gets started.
All right, we'll see what happens as a result of that strategy. Lanhi Chen, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
CBS News has learned that there was an apparent sense of unease during President Trump's visit to the CIA over the weekend. In his speech to CIA officials and staffers on Saturday, the president complained about the media's coverage of the size of the inaugural crowds. One official told CBS News that the comments made relations with the intelligence community worse. Jeff Pegues reports from Washington.
We heard that there are officials within the intelligence community who were stunned, frankly, by the president's speech on Saturday at CIA headquarters. Keep in mind, this is a speech that took place in front of the CIA Memorial Wall, which is sacred ground at the CIA, and there was this sense that there was there wasn't enough focus on the CIA officers who died in the line of duty. So that's one aspect of it. But the sources that I've talked to say that another reason why there was this uncomfortable feeling is because, on the one hand, the president did express his gratitude for the intelligence community's work and pledged to back the intelligence community. But on the other hand, this was a speech that, in the eyes of some of these officials within the intelligence community, this was a speech that veered into political territory. And Elaine, as you know, the intelligence community considers itself above politics.
President Trump says the ethics lawsuit filed against him is totally without merit. The suit comes from a liberal watchdog group that claims the president is in violation of law because his businesses accept payments from foreign governments. In an effort to curb conflicts of interest, the president turned over control of his company to his 2 adult sons. But ethics experts say the plan falls short of the standards met by past presidents who have divested from their assets and placed them into a blind trust. Coming up, former White House Communications Director Anita Dunn weighs in on President Trump's executive agenda and what the future holds for former President Obama. And it started mostly on social media and grew to more than 1 million demonstrators around the world. But did this weekend's women's marches plant the seeds of a larger movement? A panel of organizers and participants joins us next. You're watching Red and Blue. Hundreds of thousands of people flocked to the Capitol on Saturday, not to celebrate President Trump's inauguration, but in protest of it. The Women's March on Washington attracted more than double the amount of people expected, and millions more women across the country and around the globe also marched on Saturday. But now that the weekend is over, what happens next? Joining me now are Michigan organizer for the Women's March, Phoebe Hops, Indiana organizer Khadijah Sharif, and Democratic strategist Nomiki Konst. Ladies, welcome to you all. Phoebe and Khadijah, I'd like to start with you first. Give me a sense of how you ended up organizing groups from your states to go to Washington. Phoebe?
We saw a real need to have Michigan represented in this march. And sure enough, after I had created the initial Facebook post, we had over 250,000 people hit our site within the first week. So we knew we were onto something.
And Khadijah, what about you?
I joined the Facebook group with the organizers early November and started working there to help get women registered to secure transportation to Washington from Indiana. We ended up with over 5,000 people in our Facebook chat the first few weeks to get organized. That was basically from southern Indiana.
Wow. Let me ask you, Phoebe, so were these demonstrations in protest of Donald Trump?
Actually, they were for the different things we were marching for. We felt a need to march for our rights, to let our voices be heard in Washington, as well as just connecting with community and deciding what we needed best at the moment.
Yeah, what about you, Khadijah? What was your experience? Was this a demonstration in protest of Donald Trump?
No, this was not a protest at all. This was a demonstration of actually showing each other across the country and the world what women could do when we come together and when we organize. So the fact that Mr. Trump is now our president is a byproduct of what was created out of this movement. So the movement definitely was more of a demonstration and of women being able to motivate each other, support each other. And as you can see, we got women and men who support us from around the world out to be able to stand in a very, very united way.
So, Nomi, let me turn to you. We saw the numbers that turned out on Saturday. We see the commitment from people like Phoebe and Khadijah. What happens now for Democrats? How is it that they capitalize on what they saw took place on Saturday?
what took place on Saturday, and I was at the inauguration of President Obama, both inaugurations, and of Donald Trump, and at the Women's March in Washington. And I'll tell you, even compared to the 2009 inauguration, from what I witnessed from my vantage point on top of a dumpster truck, there were more people at this Women's March in solidarity than there even were at Obama's inauguration from my vantage point into the streets. Now, what does that mean? That means that you have a group of citizens who are there in unity on a wide array of issues, whether it's immigrants' rights, reproductive rights, student rights, native rights, indigenous rights. The list is very large, and the intersection of these issues is very clear, and that's what was represented at this march. I think just the act of the march itself put so much pressure. I mean, you saw Donald Trump try to distract the press by talking about how his inauguration was breaking record size. That meant that he was affected by that. The fact that he tried to change the conversation, that's what happens when people go to the streets. They can do it peacefully like they did at the Women's March, where there were no arrests and it was a loving experience, or unfortunately, sometimes it happens in other ways when there are more emotional protests. But people are going to go back to their communities. They're going to organize at a local level. I heard so many different folks talk about running for office, challenging their elected officials, because we know that as Democrats, we don't have a lot of power right now. And it's really going to happen from the ground up, from the local level up. And that's how you challenge things like these reproductive right attacks that are happening at the state level, all the way up to the national level, whether it's challenging, Betsy DeVos, who's running as education secretary right now. I mean, this is what activism is. Meeting in the streets, organizing at the local level. It's just not as traditional now with social media, and it's hard to define. But that's why places like, Occupy Wall Street, people said it wasn't successful. Mitt Romney got in trouble because of his 48% comment. The 99% was that came from Occupy Wall Street. Mm-hmm. So this does make a difference, and I'm excited to see what happens.
So Phoebe, let me turn to you then. What is it that you go and do now that this march is over? What are your plans?
We have a tremendous group of people wanting to move on this in Michigan. We basically want to divide by 14 different congressional districts to really hit the ground running, move this momentum into a real force, whether it be by calling our representatives, running for office, inspiring others to run for office, and just day-to-day, even local government grassroots efforts. This is what we're committed to, and we're going ahead with that.
Khadijah, what about you? And also, we use the term sometimes a lot, movement. Is this a movement, you think?
I absolutely do believe this is a movement, and I believe it's a movement because of the way it became so organic in its growth. In Indiana, we had over 10,000 women that have participated in this march, either nationally and or locally at the different sister marches across the state. We have an extremely diverse group of women that have come together to ensure that, number one, our next first move is to make sure we leave no woman behind, whether she be black, white, Hispanic, whether she be Christian, Muslim, or Jew, whether she be transgender, whether she be someone who's fighting for abortion rights, somebody who's fighting for equal rights, and so forth. We're not leaving any black lives out, no brown lives out, no green, nobody. We want to include everyone. That's our biggest goal, is to make sure every woman knows that they are to be included. Then our goal here in Indiana is to ensure that we deal with our local issues here locally, and that we insert ourselves into our political structure so that we can determine what our representation looks like, and that we ensure that from Indiana, that we send people to Washington, that we send people to Indianapolis, to our state house, that are going to represent the true values of what Hoosiers stand for. So we are really expecting to make sure that we do this on a level that has been unheard of. And these women, these mothers, these wives, these sisters, these warriors, they're ready to go. They're ready to do it. We got a big love army here, and we're ready to start moving.
Nomi, let me ask you, there are reports, we only have about a minute left here, but there are reports that the DNC chair hopefuls didn't necessarily take part. Is that a problem?
There was one DNC chair that's running, Pete Buttigieg, who's from South Bend, Indiana. He actually did a march in his locality, just to make that clear. I think it is a concern. It's not just that they didn't go to the march; it's that they went to a fundraiser meeting with a controversial figure named David Brock. And David Brock has been very close to the Clintons. He has been tied to the large money, and he is very much somebody who is against the Bernie movement, the Bernie faction of the party. He's gone after Bernie himself, Bernie's chair. He went after me. So I do think that this is a significant issue. Now, David Brock says he wants to support progressives, and he wanted to meet with all the DNC chairs to see how he could use that money to help the party. But I think they've all got a lot of work to do and a lot of explaining to do at this point.
All right, Numiki Konst, Phoebe Kotz, Khadija Sharif, thank you, ladies, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Up next, we'll take a look at the headlines that will give you a head start for Tuesday, including the impact first daughter Ivanka Trump's kids are having on the fashion industry. Plus, former President Obama may be enjoying Palm Springs with his family, but his work is not done. I'll talk with his former communications director, Anita Dunn, about Obama's third act when Red and Blue returns after this. Here's a look at some of the headlines you'll be talking about on Tuesday. The Washington Post says Senate Democrats are asking for a second hearing for Betsy DeVos, President Trump's pick for Education Secretary. They say they still need to scrutinize her potential conflicts of interest and test her preparedness to lead the department. And the New York Times reports SNL writer Katie Rich has been suspended indefinitely after mocking Barron Trump in a tweet. Rich tweeted from her personal account Friday about the president's youngest son. It's since been deleted, but reportedly said, quote, Barron will be this country's first homeschool shooter. Rich's name was not in the closing credits of Saturday Night Live this weekend. She has since apologized. And Yahoo Style reports Ivanka Trump's kids are having the Prince George effect in the United States. The brand Petite Peony made custom outfits for Ivanka's 3 children for the inauguration. The designer says her website hits are off the charts since the Trump grandkids stepped out in her clothes. Meanwhile, an investigation is underway into possible contacts between a top member of the Trump National Security Team and Russia. Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues explains in 60 seconds.
CBS News has learned that U.S. investigators have been looking into at least one phone call in late December between Michael Flynn and Russia's ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. The call came just as the Obama administration expelled dozens of Russian diplomats and announced sanctions in response to the wave of election cyber attacks. U.S. sources say that it is the timing of the call that investigators are interested in and whether there was some sort of coordination with Russian officials. So far, sources say investigators have found no evidence of wrongdoing. Today, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer said the call between Flynn and the Russian ambassador did not touch on sanctions. Flynn is now the national security advisor to President Trump. He was at the president's side on Saturday at CIA headquarters.
The Russian embassy put out a statement which reads, in accordance with diplomatic practice, the embassy does not comment on multiple contacts which are carried out on a daily basis with local interlocutors. President Trump has invited Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the White House next month. It happened during a phone conversation between the pair that Netanyahu's office described as very warm. The invitation comes amid reports that the U.S. is planning to move its embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. Jerusalem has been claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians leaders say moving the embassy there would damage the peace process. Nothing is set in stone yet. Press Secretary Sean Spicer says talks about the move are in the very beginning stages. Anita Dunn was White House Communications Director during President Obama's first term. She's here with me in New York. Anita, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Elaine.
So, President Trump billed Monday as his first full day of business. We saw a number of presidential memoranda, including one dealing with TPP, the trade agreement, backing out of that agreement with other Asian nations. But essentially, that deal is not something that had support in Congress. That was largely symbolic. What would you say, though, would be the administration's message on this first full day?
Clearly, the Trump administration came to work this morning wanting to communicate that they were getting down to business, that they were going to get things done, that they were going to move forward, and particularly on TPP, even though, as you point out, it was symbolic because it's never been ratified by Congress. It was a key campaign pledge for this president, one that he probably said at nearly every rally that he went to. And so it's a strong signal to his supporters that he's keeping his word. So it's an important day for him, and much better than his weekend.
And so some people have noted that the executive actions that he's taken essentially follow a template set by President Obama in his own executive actions. What would you say to that?
I would say that it's a very good playbook, and that President Trump is showing that he's not going to wait for Congress, even though he controls Congress. I think one of the biggest surprises he is about to face is that the pace of Congress isn't exactly the pace he may be expecting or may be anticipating. So, but the executive actions, I think, were very symbolic, but they were important messages that he sent to his supporters.
And so are you happy with that precedent that was established?
You know, President Obama, for the first 2 years he was in office, worked through the legislature. Once the legislature refused to work with him, he did what he could, how he could do it. I think that, you know, as President Trump will learn, legislation lasts a lot longer than executive actions do.
So let me ask you about the Women's March. You participated in a march in Sarasota, Florida.
I did.
How many women showed up for that?
They estimate over 10,000. The prevalent emotion from everyone I spoke with down there was, we never expected to see so many people here.
So then the question is for Democrats, how do they capitalize on that? How do they harness that energy and enthusiasm?
Well, I think a lot of people are asking themselves that and spent Saturday saying, look at all these people, look at this energy. What do we do with it? So people are looking at different things. I think one place that it should and probably will be channeled will be into the upcoming Supreme Court nomination. You know, during the campaign, Donald Trump pledged to nominate a justice who would be committed to overturning Roe versus Wade. You know, the majority of women, the majority of people in the United States disagree with that. That's out of the mainstream thinking, but it's also about women's reproductive freedom and choice. So I think that you could certainly see channeling a lot of that energy and activism into the Supreme Court fight.
All right, let's talk about President Obama. He's going to have to decide whether to use his profile to criticize the Trump administration, which, as you know, would be a break from precedent where previous presidents have sat back and held any kind of criticism out of deference to the current sitting president. What do you think the risks might be? How would you advise him on whether or not to weigh in over the course of a Trump administration?
Well, I think what President Obama has said is that, you know, he certainly doesn't intend to be out there doing rapid response every day, nor should he, nor would it be appropriate. And we have to let other people in this political party start to take leadership roles, the leaders of the future. It's time to do that. But that on issues that he believes, you know, go right to the heart of who we are as a nation, he will speak out if he feels it's an appropriate thing for him to do. The other thing President Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama did over the weekend was put out a video asking supporters, asking everybody really to send their ideas for what their foundation should do, and making a commitment that it too would be about training the next generation of leaders without any politics involved, of course. And I think that what President Obama is looking to do is really create a situation where other people step up and lead, not just him.
All right. Anita Dunn, a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Elaine.
Former President George H.W. Bush and his wife Barbara appear to be on the mend. The former First Lady has been discharged from a hospital in Houston. She was treated for exhaustion and bronchitis. And the former president will soon be moved from the intensive care unit. Doctors say the two have been like therapy for one another. The 92-year-old former president was having breathing problems when he was first admitted to the hospital earlier this month. Jim McGrath, spokesman for the Bushes, posted a picture of former President Bush and Barbara Bush on Twitter, writing, "President and Mrs. George H.W. Bush thank their fellow Americans and friends from around the world for their prayers and good wishes." After the break, I'll get you caught up on the rest of the day's news, including new details on the devastating string of tornadoes that hit parts of the southern U.S., the latest on the recovery, and the threatening weather on the way. We'll see you back here again on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. You're watching CBSN.